Marriage is supposed to be built on trust, and for 10 years, I thought Rachel and I had that. We met when she was waitressing at a cafe I frequented during my sales trips. Her laugh drew me in before her looks did, though she had both in spades. I remember thinking I'd hit the jackpot, a smart, beautiful woman who could make me laugh when the world seemed heavy. Our marriage wasn't perfect, of course, but I thought we were solid. We had a rhythm, weekly date nights, Sunday hikes, shared goals of saving for a better home, and eventually, a family. Rachel loved being around people, she was the life of the party, always making friends easily. I was quieter but didn't mind, she balanced me out. Our differences made us stronger. At least, that's what I believed. Lately, though, Rachel's warmth seemed distant. It started subtly. Her laughter around me felt less genuine, like she was going through the motions. Date nights dwindled, replaced by excuses, I'm too tired, work has been crazy, or let's just stay in tonight. Our once thriving intimacy slowed from twice a week to barely once a month. Every time I tried to talk about it, she'd brush me off. It's just work stress, Jace, she'd say, forcing a smile. Let's not overthink this. I didn't want to push. I mean, I've read enough articles to know marriage goes through its ebbs and flows. Maybe this was just one of ours. But the phone, it was always in her hand, or flipped screen down when I walked into the room, added a new layer of doubt. And the late nights? They started becoming a pattern. Another client dinner? I asked one evening, watching her slip on a navy dress that hugged her figure perfectly. Yes, with the firm partners, she said over her shoulder, applying lipstick in the mirror. Her tone was light, almost rehearsed. It's important I show my face, you know. Sure, I said, forcing a grin, though the tightness in my chest betrayed me. What time will you be home? Late. Don't wait up, she replied casually before grabbing her clutch and heading out. I told myself it was nothing. Rachel had always been ambitious, determined to build her career in event planning. But even I couldn't deny that it felt like I wasn't part of the equation anymore. A few days later, Mark, my best friend since college, noticed my mood. We'd been watching a game at my house when he turned to me during halftime. Alright, what's up? He asked, setting his beer down on the coffee table. Nothing, I lied, shrugging. Bull, he said with a smirk. You've barely touched your drink, and you're fidgeting like a guy waiting on bad news. What gives? Mark had always been perceptive. I sighed, leaning back on the couch. It's probably nothing, just Rachel. She's been distant lately. Mark raised an eyebrow. Distant how? I hesitated. She's different. Always on her phone, working late more often. I don't know, man. Maybe it's just stress. Mark's expression darkened slightly. Have you asked her about it? Yeah, but she just says everything's fine, I replied, shaking my head. I trust her, Mark. I don't want to be one of those paranoid husbands who sees problems that aren't there. Trust is good, Jace, but don't ignore your instincts, Mark said, his tone serious. If something feels off, there's usually a reason. I nodded, though his words lingered longer than I wanted them to. The next weekend, I decided to shake off the tension. Rachel was in a rare good mood, and we planned to hit my favorite bar, Cooper's Taproom, for a drink before catching a movie. I'd been going to Cooper's for years. It was a local spot, nothing fancy, but it felt like home. Tom, the bartender, always made sure my drink was ready before I even ordered. When we walked in, Rachel's hand was looped around my arm, and for a moment, I let myself believe things were back to normal. Tom greeted me with his usual grin. Jason, Rachel, good to see you too. Hey, Tom, I said, sliding into our usual spot at the bar. Two of the usual, please. You got it, Tom replied, his smile easy as ever. Rachel seemed unusually chatty with him that night. I chalked it up to her friendly nature, though a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something felt different. I shook it off. A week later, she was working late again. Alone in the house, I found myself staring at the clock. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. rolled around. When she finally came home, the faint smell of cologne, not mine, lingered in the air. "Rough night?" I asked, forcing my tone to stay neutral. "Exhausting," she replied, kicking off her heels. "I just need sleep." The conversation died there, but my suspicions didn't. Something was wrong, but I still wasn't ready to face the truth. Rachel and I had built a life together, a home, a marriage I thought was unshakable. The cracks forming now weren't just cracks, they were fault lines. And I had no idea how deep they ran. I hadn't planned on stopping by Cooper's that night, but after another argument with Rachel over something as trivial as takeout, I needed an escape. Mark wasn't free, and sitting at home in silence while Rachel holed up in the bedroom wasn't an option. Cooper's was comfortingly familiar, even on nights like this. The dim lighting, the soft hum of conversation, and the clink of glasses were grounding. Tom was behind the bar as usual, mixing a cocktail while chatting with a regular. "Jason. Haven't seen you in a while," Tom greeted, setting a beer in front of me without waiting for my order. "Yeah, life's been busy," I replied, offering a half-hearted smile. "Busy sucks," he said with a grin. "This one's on me. You look like you need it." I chuckled and took a sip. Tom always had a way of making people feel at ease, and for a while, I let the bar's atmosphere settle my nerves. I stayed at the counter, scrolling through my phone, only half listening to the conversations around me. That's when I heard it. "She's married, man," a voice said behind me, laughing in disbelief. I didn't turn immediately, but my ears perked up. "Yeah, and? Doesn't bother me." "She's the one sneaking around," Tom's familiar voice replied. I froze, my beer halfway to my lips. "You're playing with fire, dude." "What if her husband finds out?" the other man asked, his tone half-joking. "Won't happen." "She's careful," Tom replied, his voice smug. "Besides, it's not like he'd know what to do if he did. Guy's clueless." They both laughed, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't unusual for bartenders to get wrapped up in the drama of their patrons, and for all I knew, Tom was talking about someone else entirely. But the edge in his tone stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind like a splinter. I shook it off, finishing my beer and leaving cash on the counter. "Thanks, Tom. I'll see you around," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Anytime, man," Tom replied, flashing his usual grin. But as I walked out, the unease didn't leave me. The way he'd said "married" lingered, scratching at my thoughts like a faint but insistent itch. Later that night, Rachel was unusually late getting home again. I was sitting on the couch, aimlessly flipping through TV channels when I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked in with her usual nonchalant air, dropping her bag on the counter and slipping off her heels. "Hey," she said, glancing at me. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone casual. Rachel headed to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, her phone buzzing as she set it on the counter. She didn't seem to notice, but I did. The screen lit up, displaying a message. "Tom, still thinking about earlier. You drive me wild." Time seemed to stop. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't the same Tom. Maybe. "Jason?" Rachel's voice jolted me from my thoughts. "Huh?" I asked, quickly looking away from her phone. "Did you hear me?" "I asked if you wanted anything before I head to bed," she said, her voice casual. "No, I'm good," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded and grabbed her phone, not bothering to check the message. "Good night," she said, heading upstairs. I sat frozen on the couch, my thoughts spiraling. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I hated the picture they were forming. Rachel's late nights, her constant phone usage, the way Tom's words at the bar had stuck with me, it all clicked now. Tom wasn't just talking about any married woman. He was talking about my wife. I didn't sleep that night. Rachel's phone buzzed on the nightstand more than once, and though I didn't dare try to check it again, I knew who it was. Tom. The bartender I'd shared countless laughs and drinks with was the one she was sneaking around with. I replayed every interaction with him in my mind. The times he'd smiled at Rachel when we went to Cooper's together. The way he always seemed extra attentive when she was there. How could I have missed it? When morning came, Rachel was already up, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. She looked like nothing was wrong, scrolling through her phone with a faint smile on her lips. "I've got errands today," she said without looking up. "I'll probably be out for most of the afternoon." "All right," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Inside, I was seethed. I don't know how I made it through the day. My thoughts were a cyclone, pulling me into every possible scenario of what might happen when I finally confronted Rachel. There was no peace, no clarity, just the growing certainty that tonight would change everything. By the time Rachel came home, I had rehearsed the confrontation in my head 100 times. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my hands gripping a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. "Hey," she called out casually as she walked through the door, dropping her bag on the counter. She kicked off her shoes and opened the fridge, her movements annoyingly normal. I couldn't take it anymore. "We need to talk." Her hand froze on the fridge handle. "Okay," she said, turning toward me with a wary expression. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." Rachel hesitated but complied, sliding into the seat and folding her arms. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the mug. "I know about you and Tom." Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the texts, Rachel," I said, my voice steady. "I saw the one he sent you the other night. Don't play dumb." Her face twisted into a mixture of shock and irritation. "You went through my phone." "Seriously, Jason?" "I didn't have to go through your phone," I snapped. "It buzzed right in front of me." "You're not exactly subtle." Rachel scoffed, shaking her head. "This is insane. Tom and I are just friends. He texts me sometimes, yes, but there's nothing going on." "Still thinking about earlier." "You drive me wild," I quoted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's just a friendly text." Her mouth opened, then closed. I could see her scrambling for an excuse, but I didn't give her the chance. "And before you try to deny it, I've been putting the pieces together for weeks," I continued. "The late nights, the way you're always glued to your phone, how you've completely checked out of this marriage, it all adds up." Rachel's face flushed with anger. "You're paranoid, Jason. I've told you I've been busy with work." "Cut the crap, Rachel," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. The sound echoed in the silent kitchen. "Just tell me the truth for once." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then Rachel's shoulders slumped, and her confident facade cracked. "It was just a mistake," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I stared at her, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "A mistake?" I echoed, my voice low and dangerous. "How many times, Rachel?" She looked away, biting her lip. "It wasn't like that." "How many times?" I repeated, my tone icy. Rachel hesitated, then finally mumbled, "A few." "A few?" I repeated, my disbelief turning into a bitter laugh. "God, Rachel. Do you even hear yourself?" "It wasn't serious," she insisted, her voice rising. It was stupid, okay? I don't even know why I did it. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything. I repeated, my anger boiling over. You've been sneaking around with the guy for God knows how long, lying to me, throwing our marriage away, and it didn't mean anything. I'm sorry, Jason, she shouted, tears welling up in her eyes. I wasn't thinking. I got caught up in the attention, the excitement. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. So what now? You expect me to just forgive you and pretend this never happened? I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. Her tears didn't move me. I'd spent years loving her, trusting her, believing we were building a life together. And now, that trust was shattered, lying in pieces on the floor between us. I'm done, I said finally, my voice cold. Rachel looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Jason, wait. No, I said, cutting her off. I need some time to think. I can't even look at you right now. I grabbed my keys and my coat, walking out the door before she could say another word. I drove aimlessly for a while, the anger and betrayal swirling inside me like a storm. Eventually, I found myself parked outside Mark's house. I texted him, and within minutes, he opened the door, his expression concerned. You look like hell, he said, stepping aside to let me in. Feel like it too, I muttered, dropping onto his couch. Mark handed me a beer and sat down beside me. What happened? I told him everything, the texts, the confrontation, Rachel's excuses. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking with suppressed anger. Mark let out a low whistle. Man, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to do, I admitted, staring at the floor. Part of me wants to walk away, but, we've built a life together, you know. I can't just throw that away. You're not the one throwing it away, Mark said firmly. She is. And you don't have to make any decisions right now. Take some time. Get your head straight. But if I were you, I'd gather some evidence before you do anything permanent. Evidence? I asked, frowning. You need to protect yourself, Mark said. If this blows up and she tries to twist the story, you'll need proof. You've already got the text, right? Maybe there's more. I nodded slowly, Mark's words sinking in. He was right. As much as I hated the thought of digging into Rachel's betrayal, I couldn't afford to leave myself vulnerable. I can't believe this is my life, I muttered, rubbing my temples. You'll get through this, Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Jace. And I'm here for whatever you need. I stayed at Mark's for the next few days, letting the dust settle while I tried to wrap my head around what had happened. The anger and hurt didn't fade, but I knew one thing for sure, Rachel wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. She'd made her bed. Now she was going to lie in it. The first night away from Rachel was unbearable. I sat alone in Mark's spare bedroom, staring at the blank ceiling, replaying every memory of our marriage. It felt like I was trying to untangle a web of lies, but every thread I pulled led to the same truth: the woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had betrayed me. I couldn't stop thinking about Tom. He wasn't just some random guy. He was Tom, the bartender I'd laughed with, confided in during rough patches, trusted to know me well enough to pour my usual drink before I even asked. The fact that he was the one made the betrayal cut even deeper. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Rachel's Instagram. It was a carefully curated version of our life: vacations, anniversaries, lazy Sundays with coffee mugs in hand. Her most recent post was a throwback photo of us on our wedding day, captioned, 10 years of love and counting red heart. The date on the post was from a month ago, and all I could think about was whether she'd already been with Tom by then. I slammed my phone down, the screen lighting up with the wedding photo one last time before going dark. The next morning, Mark found me in the kitchen, nursing my third cup of coffee. "Get any sleep?" he asked, leaning against the counter. I shook my head. "How do you sleep when your entire life's been a lie?" Mark grabbed his own mug, taking a seat across from me. "You know, beating yourself up isn't going to change anything." "I just don't understand it," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I gave her everything, Mark. I worked late so she wouldn't have to. I planned dates, cooked dinners, took care of the house. And she just threw it all away for some bartender." Mark didn't respond immediately, letting me vent. "She told me it didn't mean anything," I continued bitterly. "How am I supposed to believe that? You don't risk your marriage, your home, your entire life, for something that doesn't mean anything." "People are selfish," Mark said finally, his voice low. "Sometimes they just take what they want, no matter the cost." I looked at him, the weight of his words settling on me. "So what now?" Mark leaned forward. "Now, you take control of the narrative. Don't let Rachel and Tom paint you as the bad guy or get away with this. You have the truth on your side. Use it." That night, I sat on Mark's couch with a box of old photo albums, flipping through the story of my life with Rachel. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut. Here we were on our honeymoon in Maui, her arms wrapped around my neck as we laughed in the surf. Another picture showed us at her sister's wedding, dancing like nobody else was in the room. There were Christmas mornings, lazy Sundays, date nights at Cooper's, all frozen in time, untouched by the betrayal that would come years later. I stopped at a photo of her birthday last year. We'd gone to Cooper's with friends, and Tom was in the background, grinning as he poured shots. My stomach turned as I realized how far back this might have started. Was it that night? Had they exchanged glances while I sat there, oblivious, talking to Mark? I slammed the album shut and buried my face in my hands. "What are you doing to yourself?" Mark's voice cut through the silence. He stood in the doorway, watching me with concern. Reminding myself how stupid I was, I muttered. Mark sat down beside me, grabbing the album and tossing it aside. "You weren't stupid, Jason. You trusted your wife. That's not a flaw, it's what you're supposed to do in a marriage." "Doesn't feel like it," I said, my voice hollow. "Well, now it's time to stop mourning and start fighting," Mark said, his tone firm. "Rachel and Tom think they can get away with this. Prove them wrong." I looked at him, a small flicker of determination igniting in my chest. "How?" Mark smirked. "I have an idea." Over the next 2 days, Mark and I put together a plan. It wasn't enough to confront Rachel and Tom privately, I wanted the truth out in the open. They had disrespected me, trampled on our marriage, and humiliated me in my own community. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences. Mark started by helping me gather evidence. I already had the text from Tom, but we dug deeper. Mark found a friend who worked IT at Rachel's company and convinced him to check her work email for anything suspicious. Sure enough, there were messages between her and Tom, nothing explicit, but enough to confirm that their affair wasn't just a one-time mistake. Meanwhile, I went back to Cooper's, sitting in the corner with my hood up like some kind of undercover cop. I watched Tom as he worked, his charm on full display as he chatted with patrons. At one point, he leaned in close to a woman at the bar, whispering something that made her laugh. It hit me then, I wasn't special. Rachel wasn't special. Tom was just a predator, taking what he could, when he could, without a second thought. By the end of the week, we had everything we needed. "Here's the plan," Mark said as we sat in his living room, surrounded by printouts of texts and emails. "We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Rachel, Tom, their co-workers, the regulars at Cooper's, no one's going to walk away from this thinking you were the bad guy." I nodded, my jaw set. "Let's do it." Mark helped me draft a letter, detailing everything, the affair, the texts, the late nights, the lies. We kept it factual, attaching screenshots of the messages and emails as proof. Then we sent it out, anonymously, to Rachel's boss, Tom's manager at Cooper's, and a few mutual friends who we knew would spread the word. Next, we planned a public confrontation at Cooper's. Mark promised to back me up if things got heated. "We'll keep it classy," he said with a grin. But memorable. I wasn't just going to walk away from this mess, I was going to clean it up and leave them with the consequences. First on the list, the divorce. I met with my lawyer, who assured me that Rachel's infidelity and her misuse of our joint finances would strengthen my case. She had been pulling money from our savings, money I'd worked hard for, to fund her secret dinners and hotel stays with Tom. "Divorce papers are ready," my lawyer told me, sliding the folder across the desk. "All you need to do is deliver them." "Trust me," I said, picking up the folder. "I have a plan for that." That evening, Mark and a couple of friends joined me at Cooper's. The bar was busy, filled with regulars laughing over drinks and swapping stories. It was the perfect setting for what I had in mind. Tom stood behind the counter, his usual confident smirk plastered across his face as he poured drinks and charmed the crowd. His arrogance made my blood boil. He had humiliated me in my own marriage, and now he was standing there like nothing had happened. Mark leaned over to me as we settled into a booth. "You ready for this?" "More than ready," I replied, my voice steady. The moment came when Tom walked over to our table, his grin faltering slightly when he saw me. "Jason," he said, feigning surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," I replied, standing up. "But since you're here, let's have a chat." The room seemed to quiet as I raised my voice. All eyes turned to us, the murmurs fading as people sensed the tension. "You see, Tom," I began, my tone casual but cutting, "I've been coming to this bar for years. I thought of it as my safe place. You, as the bartender, were part of that, someone I trusted, someone I considered a friend." Tom's face turned pale, his usual charm evaporating. "Jason, I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it. You don't get to explain yourself, not after what you've done." I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, slapping them onto the bar in front of him. "Here's a copy of the papers I just served to Rachel. And in case you're curious, there's a section about the money you two stole from me, our joint savings account, which you helped her drain for your little escapades." A gasp rippled through the bar as I continued, my voice rising. "You've been parading around like this is some harmless fling, like it's all fun and games. But let me tell you something, Tom, real men don't destroy families for kicks. Real men don't sneak around with another man's wife while pretending to be his friend." Tom opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked around the room, realizing the regulars who once laughed with him were now staring at him with disgust. "You think you're the big shot here, huh?" I said, my tone sharp as a knife. "Well, enjoy it while you can, because I've reported Rachel's financial mismanagement to my lawyer. And when this goes to court, you'll be exposed for exactly who you are, a thief and a homewrecker." I stepped closer, leaning in so only he could hear. "You can keep the tips, Tom. You're going to need them." The room was dead silent as I turned and walked out, my friends following behind me. Mark clapped me on the shoulder as we stepped into the cool night air. "You handled that like a pro," he said, grinning. "Had to be done," I replied, my chest feeling lighter than it had in weeks. The divorce moved quickly. With the evidence we had against Rachel, I kept the house and most of our assets. Rachel didn't fight me, she couldn't, not with the proof of her infidelity and her misuse of our savings hanging over her head. Moving out of the house was her idea. "I can't stay here," she had said quietly the day she packed her things. "Too many memories." I didn't argue. I just watched as she loaded the last of her boxes into her car and drove away. The days that followed weren't easy. I had moments where the grief hit me hard, moments where I'd find an old note Rachel had left me, or stumble across one of her favorite books on the shelf. But as time passed, the pain dulled, replaced by something stronger, clarity. I started focusing on myself, rebuilding my life one day at a time. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with, started hitting the gym again, and even took up hiking, a hobby I'd let slide during the chaos of my marriage. Mark, ever the loyal friend, stayed by my side through it all. "You've got this, Jace," he'd say every time I doubted myself. "This is your chance to start fresh." Months later, as I stood in my empty living room, staring at the freshly painted walls, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Rachel was gone. Tom was a distant memory. And I was still standing, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized something profound: I hadn't lost as much as I thought I had. Yes, my marriage was over. Yes, I'd been betrayed. But in the process, I'd gained something invaluable: clarity about who I was and what I deserved. As I scrolled through old photos on my phone, I paused on a picture of Rachel and me from years ago. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, oblivious to the cracks that would later form. I deleted the photo. Some betrayals don't break you, they rebuild you stronger, I thought. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was this: never let someone's betrayal make you bitter. It's a reflection of who they are, not who you are.